Hello and welcome to ORF Digital Conversations. Before I get to my guest of the day, a small note for our viewers. Please subscribe to ORF's channel on YouTube to receive our curated content on your timelines. Early this year, US-India ties were in focus with President Donald Trump's maiden visit to India. Now, just a couple of months later, much like most of the world, both US and India are in the eye of the COVID-19 storm. With over 300,000 cases, the US has now surpassed China and Italy as the most affected nation by the novel coronavirus. Meanwhile, India remains under a strict 21-day nationwide lockdown. To discuss how this crisis may affect US-India ties and possibly even offer some avenues of cooperation, today we have with us Ms. Catherine Hadda. Ms. Hadda is a former senior diplomat. She has served in various US missions around the world. Until recently, she was the Honorable US Consul General in Hyderabad. She is now an adjunct fellow at the CSIS. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Hadda.
Well, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Kashish, and thank you to your viewers as well.
Thank you for your time, ma'am. Before we get into the prospects for US-India ties, I want to start with a macro level question. How do you see the COVID-19 pandemic accentuating the nativist movements around the world? Will the pandemic serve as a shot in the arm for anti-globalization forces?
Well, appropriately enough, the Chinese word for crisis, I don't know if you're familiar with this, is Weiji. Wei means danger, Ji means Jihui or opportunity. So I do see a lot of possible dangers and also a lot of opportunities. The dangers are that we all start acting in our own orbits. I want to add that it is very understandable and natural, and indeed it should happen that governments look out for their citizens and citizens look out for their fellow citizens. So I'm not saying we shouldn't put our countries as a priority, but there's a danger that by doing that, we'll find ourselves doing things like chasing after the same scarce resources when really we should be focusing on how to create more resources, how to create flexibility, how to work in tandem, not only on the immediate pandemic, but to create economic resilience in all our countries. So those are the opportunities. We can be doing that. The danger is, in the guise of doing that, we're going to erect trade and investment barriers. Countries around the world, some of them unfortunately are using this as an opportunity to take away democratic freedoms, and seize more power for themselves. You're seeing that in Hungary, for example. And then there's the whole question on how we use new technologies for good rather than to take away our personal freedoms. And so for all that, in addition to the commercial synergies that I think the United States and India enjoy, I think we're natural partners going forward in this. And I hope this is an opportunity for us to put our economic relationship in the same kind of strategic framework that it seems our defense and security relationship is going in. This is our opportunity. Yeah. The danger is we'll blow it.
Before we get to US-India, one more question with respect to the US specifically. In what ways do you think the current Democratic candidates and President Trump will draw on the crisis in their respective messaging for the 2020 elections?
Well, I'm just going to touch on this very lightly because I do want to talk about the US-India partnership. I think there's little doubt that both the current pandemic and the economic aftermath are going to be subjects of the election. But a lot on how it's presented and how it resonates with voters is going to depend on what happens between now and then. In terms of a political cycle, November's still quite a ways away, and things are moving so quickly now. I think it's going to be very hard to predict how that's going to play out. The one thing I do want to leave with your viewers, though, is I believe no matter who is elected, the US-India relationship will still be important. That president is still going to want to build on it. And so we'll just have to see who it really is.
Okay, so let's turn to US-India now. So the US imports a substantial portion of its active pharmaceutical ingredients and common drugs from India. Recently, PM Modi and President Trump also had a phone call regarding India's export of chloroquine to cater to rising demand in the US. How can the US and India come together in the pharma space to fight COVID-19?
Well, I think It's good to see that our countries are already talking about this, and our foreign ministers have also been talking. And the conversation, as I understand, they're also having is on supply chains, not just between our countries, but how do we avoid being too dependent on any one country, China or any country? How do we diversify? And that conversation is going to have to happen, between our governments and also bringing along the companies, obviously. And so I think what we have is a very vibrant relationship in pharma already. I saw it when I was in Hyderabad. I mentioned in my recent article, visiting Dr. Reddy, which produces, huge proportion of the generic drugs that go to the United States, and seeing that actually there were also APIs from the United States being imported. So it was more of a two-way trade than you might imagine. And I'm also delighted to see that scientific, pharmaceutical research is going on between our countries in light of the context, in light of this crisis. There's a company called Bharat Biotech, which I know well from my time in Hyderabad, and they're working with an American company called FluGen and the University of Wisconsin to develop a intranasal anti-coronavirus vaccine. I wish them all the luck, and I imagine we're going to be seeing more cooperation like that. So that's just in the pharma space. I think other industries have room for cooperation as well.
Yeah, with respect to this context, we're all rooting for that.
Yeah.
A quick follow-up on that, though. Do you think heightened US-India pharma ties will also play a constructive role in dampening recent trade tensions? Let me just give some context for our viewers.
Okay.
US-India ties have been marred with trade tensions under Trump. There have been tariffs and counter-tariffs. The Trump administration has even revoked India's benefits under the GSP program. And India has insisted that it's indeed narrowing the trade imbalance by increasing import of US oil, gas, civil aviation aircrafts, and of course, defense platforms. So will pharma ties be the silver bullet that we've been looking for?
I don't think it'll be the single bullet, but I think in terms of what I was saying at the top of trying to put things in context, a larger context of increased partnership, increased flexibility of supply chains, how we can work together, I think it will be helpful. Another area that isn't so much talked about, but I think should be, is in the areas of artificial intelligence, machine learning, all sorts of high-tech applications. Our IT sectors are already so intertwined. Again, when I was in Hyderabad, it's the city I know the best because I lived there for 3 years. If you visit Microsoft, most people know Satya Nadella is from Hyderabad, but if you visit Microsoft, which happens to be the largest campus, the one in Hyderabad is the largest campus Microsoft has outside the United States. You would see what I call the intellectual supply chain, that research, in one place is helping research that's going on in the United States, around the world. So, ideas can cross geography just as microbes unfortunately cross geography, and I'm hoping we'll be hearing more about the ideas and less about the microbes in coming months.
Okay, so my last question to you. Once the world passes through this turbulent phase, how best can the international community address China's initial lack of transparency on the coronavirus outbreak? And specifically for US and India, how can these two countries cooperate over creating a more responsive global governance architecture on such issues?
Well, I do feel China has some explaining to do and needs to be called into account for its failure to report the scale of this problem and for apparently misreporting some numbers. And now there's a disinformation campaign about the origin of the pandemic. And I think China needs to be called into account on that. I also believe that the WHO has become somewhat politicized, and the US and India should again join hands and insist that Taiwan gain entry. The WHO's doing great work. It can do better work with all hands on deck. And I think this pandemic is proving Taiwan would make valuable contributions there and shouldn't be kept out for political reasons. But I also want to make clear we can't shun China. Microbes jump borders, and we need to have them engaged. I believe we can learn a lot from China about treatment, about how they mitigated this problem. So, I do think there's also room for cooperation with them, and it would be a mistake to leave them out of the conversation, certainly.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Hadar. On behalf of ORF, we hope you and your loved ones stay safe in these uncertain times. Thank you for your time.
I hope the same to you and all your viewers. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am.